Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
School closings, charters, and the rise of the iZone schools in Memphis. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by two members of the Shelby County Board of Education. Teresa Jones, who chairs the board. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you.
And Chris Caldwell, another member of the board. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Also Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So we'll start with the headline of this week, which is the closing of some schools. And I'm going to try to summarize them real quickly because just the very closings touch on so much of what's going on in the schools right now in terms of charters and what's an iZone school. And I'll do this real quickly. Lincoln Elementary School voted to close and students moving to A.B. Hill, which becomes an innovation school or an iZone school. Southside Middle School closes, the kids go to Riverview. Brookmead Elementary closes. Airways Middle School closes, and the students move to Sherwood Middle School, an innovation school, zone school, and North Haven K-8 school goes back to being an elementary school. Woodstock 6 to 10 school goes back to being middle school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I go through that not to make light of it, but the complications of the school closings are just amazing. And so let me ask you, I'll start with you, Teresa, why these closings now, and what's the school board trying to achieve?
Well, we're trying to achieve, number one, a stable environment where we are able to provide parents with what they've asked for, more resources dedicated to educating their children. Unfortunately, in the climate that's present in Memphis, we're not able to do that in each neighborhood school. And part of it is funding, enrollment. There are a number of factors that go into why we're having to do this. And quite frankly, the ASD and charter's presence plays into that. We have to adjust by state law. They are authorized to do certain things in terms of taking over certain schools, and they let us know what those schools are. But they don't take over the entire schools. Very seldom do they do that. Now the ASD does, but charters do not. So we're left with fragmented schools, fragmented communities, and we have the obligation to educate those children and provide. We have to figure out the best way logistically to do that with the funds that we have, and that's really why we're doing it. Part of it has to do with municipal having their own schools. There were communities who were traditionally part of those municipal districts. They fell outside after they formed their own districts. So we had pockets of communities who were left, and they didn't necessarily have the numbers for a healthy school. So we had to make decisions. What's the best place to send those children?
And just for lay of the land for people who don't know necessarily, the ASD is the Achievement School District established it's a statewide effort to take over the bottom 5% schools. They've taken over 20 schools, give or take, in Memphis. They're taking over more. The iZones are essentially you correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, the Shelby County Schools answer to the ASD. It's a different type of model of schools. It's been very successful from a testing and parent satisfaction point of view. Is some of this move of these schools that closed and moving those students into iZones, is that partly to preserve those students within Shelby County to kind of is it a maneuver around the ASD so those kids don't go into ASD schools or those schools don't become ASD schools?
Well, both the ASD and the iZone came out of the Race to the Top bid, and that was the state's program that they were going to address the underperforming schools and children that were behind. So in some ways it is not necessarily a way to counteract it, but in several instances where we merged a couple of schools, it was to provide extra resources to those students, so that then we wouldn't merge two schools and then have another school that was then struggling. So what we found from some of the previous combinations was that we really need to have intense resources. And the iZone, what we found is having the longer school day, which is not, is only happening in the iZone schools, having a strong leader, having a leader that's able to hire their whole staff, also to have more autonomy and to have more input in terms of the assessments the kids have. That's made a big difference in the performance. And I think also the connection that it is part of Shelby County Schools, where the iZone comes across as being some foreign entity forced on the families in the neighborhoods from the state.
In the ASD.
Yeah,
I mean,
or the
ASD,
ASD,
yeah,
and
the
that
ASD,
last
yeah.
one. Yeah. And roughly, then I'll turn to Bill. How many iZone schools are there, give or take, right now?
I'd say they're about 15.
About 15. About how many ASD schools is the ASD taken over? Somewhere in the 20s. I should have had this. And then how many schools are left that are just what we would call regular Shelby County schools after that? Another 60 or so?
It's probably more than that. It's probably like 100.
Another 100. Okay. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot with that, but just so we have kind of a lay of the land of where we are. Bill, go ahead.
So with the resources that the Innovation Zone schools get, and we should also point out that Innovation Zone schools do not operate as the ASD does, where they will bring in a charter to run the school. This is still a Shelby County school, and no charters involved in that. You hear on the board quite often from parents who say, my child's not in an Innovation Zone school, they're not in an ASD school. When do the resources get to my child's school on that? And what do you say to them?
Well, we say to them that we want that model for every school. It comes down to dollars, it comes down to money, and we're always looking for ways to be able to fund that. Whenever there's an opportunity, we dedicate that funding. We try to do it strategically, looking at a feeder pattern. There are a lot of things go into how we decide which schools, and that's one reason I supported the change in terms of Airways, because they will now be on a continuum through 12th grade with iZone treatment through the middle school and then through Melrose, who's also in iZone. So we have to look at the location, the feeder patterns, the data from that school, and determine when and how we make it happen for your school.
Mm-hmm. And just to explain to people, Airways Middle School was going to become part of the Achievement School District, and Yes Prep was the charter operator that was going to operate that school under the ASD. Yes Prep pulled out 4 months before the start of getting ready for the next school year, and in the process of that, the board voted, Superintendent Hobson proposed that basically all of the students from Airways now will go to Sherwood Middle School in the school year that begins in August. Chris, in all of this, we hear so much about neighborhood schools. The definition of a neighborhood school is becoming much more different because of the pressures involved here than it once was.
True. I mean, part of it is the tight resources, and Tennessee is funded 45th in the country, so we're not getting the adequate resources to do all the things. But you have a lot of factors that come into play. One of the primary reasons is how the neighborhoods have changed and where the population growth is, and that's outside of anything that the board has control over. Also, it's very interesting. A lot of times when we have a closure, we have people that are very passionate about these schools, but they don't even live in the neighborhood anymore. And a lot of instances don't have kids in that school because they've moved elsewhere. So there are just so many factors that are pushing all this that we're having to react to it, and it's sort of the perfect storm.
And we're moving into a budget season. You all are already there. What's the estimated size of the gap in funding that you're facing?
It started out at I think 125 million, and we've done worked diligently trying to reduce that with cuts and anything else that we can that we can reasonably do, including considering additional outsourcing. I think we're down to around 25 million, and we're grappling with how we close that gap, whether it be additional funding. I know there is will, and I hope that the County Commission will hear our plea and understand that we've done everything we can do. At some point we're going to start hemorrhaging, and we may be there now in terms of being able to provide those services if we don't have stability in terms of increased funding.
And just so back to the ASD situation, it's about 7,000 kids in the ASD right now. The give or take $11,000 per student that the state sends to Shelby County for those kids, it goes over to the ASD, right? All that money goes over there. Right. So it goes to the instructional salaries, the facility, and so on. It is nothing else, a revenue drain on your budget every time. And what is it? It'll ultimately be about 9,000 next year, or within a few years, kids in the ASD. So that's 9,000 times 11,000, or times 11,000 of money that the school system doesn't have anymore. Correct.
Right, and you also have to. There are traditional charters who are also recruiting, and so those numbers will add to that 9,000.
Yeah. Back to Bill though.
Chris, talk to me a bit about state funding. You've all been to Nashville many times to talk to state legislators about the necessity of fully funding the basic education program, the BEP, which is basically the formula that determines how much your local school district gets from the state. Chattanooga and the Chattanooga area school systems filed a lawsuit the last week or so on this. What's going to happen here?
Well, at the work session, we talked about, we passed a resolution to say that we wanted the administration to investigate, what needs to be done so that we could be, either participate in that lawsuit or file our own. So I think you have to look at the fact that we're 45th in the country in terms of funding our students. The BEP formula, if you look into it, is a very convoluted formula, and it's inadequate. It's, the state has lost 2 lawsuits to smaller school districts, and now there are apparent things that are affecting the larger urban school districts that talk about inadequacy of funding. The other aspects of it are that the governor, to his credit, formed a BEP committee to advise him on what can be done to make it a better process. And he's had recommendations the last 2 years that the legislators have ignored. And I think he's trying it again. It would mean about $103 million a year to Shelby County schools. And that could make a huge difference in terms of our ability to provide the resources that the kids woefully need.
And Teresa, $103 million extra, just doing the quick math, that kind of gets you over the hump here. Without that, though, do the cuts that you make go into the classroom at this point?
Well, that's the last resort. And this year, I think we did a good job of not having that happen, but who knows what's going to happen next year. And we're not even finished with this year yet. Everyone thinks that the central office staff is top heavy and they have large salaries, but those salaries have been reduced, and budgets have been cut, positions eliminated. There's only so much cutting you can do in terms of the big ask of funding children. And so we're doing that work. We're not saying just give us everything. But even if we get the $103 million, and with the climate of ASD continuing to expand and charters continuing to be authorized and new charters, the $103 million then increases to add another 25 or 30 million every year. That we cannot exist in that climate. It's just as I said, at some point it becomes unmanageable in terms of every year we never get our balance. We never have 2 or 3 years, as other systems have, where we can just do the work. We can just educate children. every year we're struggling and we're fighting for survival.
And but part of the dynamic that's going on, I think, and we talked about this before, in terms of the school closings, is a shifting population and a kind of somewhat stagnant population overall in Memphis. Are there other, I guess that leads me to, are there other school closings on the horizon just because you've got schools, in the past, different schools that are half full or a third full, and it's just not efficient, it's not necessarily the most kind of energized place to have a third full school? I mean, is more of that underway?
Well, I wouldn't say
on the horizon, I should say.
I would think that it potentially could be on the horizon. Some of it is a reaction to, we don't know what the ASD is going to do. They have the authority based on what the state's allowed them to do,
Right.
to take over many more schools than they've taken.
It's another 23, I think, by my note here.
And they have a capacity constraint, because what they have done so far is take over one grade and then layer on another grade until they've finally taken over the whole school.
Right.
So sometimes it's a reaction to that, as well as declining enrollment. But primarily what's been driving it recently has been the ASD. And so I would hope that we're to the most part, the schools that need to be combined or closed because of lack of student enrollment, we should be getting to the end of that.
But at the outset of having an achievement school district and taking the whole cap off of the charters, the argument on the other side was, okay, this is competition, and competition is going to make everything better.
And I'd like to answer that, because I think you're right, and we didn't ask for it, but it's the order of the day. I think what we've done in the iZone, we've rose to the occasion. We've shown that given the resources, we can compete, and I really want to give kudos to those traditional public school teachers who, given the principal, given the opportunity to choose his staff and good teachers, that to me is the key to why iZone is successful. We're not experimenting. We have veteran teachers who have the skill level, who come together, and they have the resources. They know the children, they've worked with them for years, and they're able to make things happen and create an environment where learning is happening.
And let me, from a story, a really good overview of the whole lay of the land with ASDs and charters and iZones and so on that the Memphis Flyer did recently. Cherokee Elementary in Orange Mound became an iZone school, and reading proficiency went up 26% in the 3 years. In 2011, before the takeover, only 11% of the students in the elementary school were proficient in reading. In math, that went up to 48% in 2014 versus 16%. The science gains were 41% proficient in 2014 versus 7% in 2011. And part of what happens with an iZone, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think it's what happened at Cherokee, is all the staff is laid off, a new principal comes in, they have tremendous latitude to hire, fire, and pick the ones they want. So Rodney Rowan, the principal, comes in, he says, I was not in Cherokee in 2011, but I'm convinced they didn't open a science book. 93% of the kids failed the science test at that time. So clearly, and I don't think either of you would say that for all the problems you're facing now, there was a huge problem with the schools and underperforming schools. And so when the iZone clearly is working. I think Dorsey's been pretty open about pointing out that, Dorsey Hobson, the current superintendent, that the iZone gains have been ahead of the ASD gains.
In the state in a lot of instances.
In the state in a lot of instances. So, the problem, there was a huge problem in terms of outcomes and with students, right? I mean, the data showed that. So, right. To some degree, these charter schools, the ASD, the competition, just the tremendous disruption has been a good thing? I mean, because you've got some performance gains like this?
Well, yes. That part has been one of the good aspect, but that's not the only thing. It's caused a lot of chaos. It's really roiled a lot of communities. And so the competition aspect of it has been good, but the other part about the iZone is it involves school improvement grants. And so that's another significant infusion of resources that comes from the state. And so, again, it just points back to a lot of it has been because of the inadequacy of funding. Everybody thinks that sometimes I get the feeling they think we don't have a heart. But I would talk about it in terms that maybe people can understand about personal budgets. When maybe you're having a lean year, then you have to make choices. I mean, everything becomes a priority, and then you look across a large district like ours, and you have to try to spread it as far as it can go, and as Teresa alluded to, without damaging the classroom, and that's where we are. In fact, one of the consultants that an outside consultant came in that has worked with other school boards and remarked that we had found most of the places for efficiencies, and we were running out of them.
Yeah. Let's go, so that I go back over the iZone, the difference, and I highlighted the scores, and you all have talked about how successful they've been and how you'd like to have more of those. The difference between an iZone and a regular school is the amount of money, but it's also, as I said, the freedom to hire, the overhaul of staff.
Yep.
Is that an anti-union kind of move there?
No, because there are other aspects of it. They have an extended school day.
Yeah.
So, and that's another a big expense is paying staff for an extra 2-3 hours a day.
But that whole dynamic, and again, the ASD does it. The charters can do it, where you go into a school and you say, "Sorry, everyone, you've been here 20 years or 2 years. Everyone is let go. You can reapply." That's a huge change. That wasn't possible 5-10 years ago.
And principals, when we were going through that about having it by mutual consent, every principal I talked to said that was a game changer.
As a positive.
As a positive,
because of the
yes.
whole notion of deadwood and ineffective teachers.
Right. Well, but to your point about, is it about the teachers and the unions? No. It's about creating an atmosphere that allows the autonomous to do what you need to do to bring these kids forward. And a lot of there's a misconception that we have that ability to do that. We do not. The state has rules, regulations, statutes they pass every year that limit how, when, and what, and we educate children. Well, when you have the iZone and you remove those barriers and all of those constraints, then the principal has the staff who can just teach.
Yeah. Okay, about 4 minutes left. Bill.
So how do you sustain the innovation zone schools? And let's talk about sustainability just in terms of keeping on doing what you're doing now in those schools as opposed to going to other schools with it.
Well, I guess I'll start from the top. If I had my wish list, we're driven by data. Everyone recognizes it. I think there's no disagreement that iZone works. My wish would be that the resources and the commitment to ASD would transfer into forming iZones throughout this community and allowing Shelby County to do the work that it has shown it can do and will do if given the resources. So splitting those resources and creating competition may have made sense in the beginning, but in these last few years, we've done what they've asked us to do. Do better by kids, create a learning environment that's conducive. We've done that. We have a model. Don't limit us by continuing to divide. Allow us to do the work and give us the funding to do that. Now, how we do it, we're hoping, as Chris said, BEP increased funding. The governor has shown some interest in doing that by his proposal. Whether it will pass, we don't know. We're certainly going before our local body to see if we can address that issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to add, in terms of competition, if it's true competition, then the resources should go to the models that are working the best. So what I would say is before the state ought to commit any more money for the ASD, they ought to seriously consider at least an equal amount of money for the iZone schools because they're outperforming the ASD schools.
And let me just read again. The iZone schools made 28% gains in math. ASD was 21. iZone was 21% in reading. ASD was 17%. iZone was 40% gains in science, and the ASD was 24%. So in all three of those key categories, they're ahead. Can the ASD, maybe I'm making something up here, but can the ASD take over a school and they can turn it over to charter operators? Can they turn it over to the iZone? I mean, can there be that kind of collaboration, or is that just politically impossible?
I would say it's probably politically impossible.
Okay, sorry, I was just dreaming there for a second.
But
Bill.
But the Achievement School District has at least a 5-year run according to its concept. What you both seem to be saying is we've got these two models on each side of a line, and the results are pretty clear. So, in your eyes, is this contest between ASD and Innovation Zone schools over?
Well,
You
no,
got 2 more innings left.
right.
Yeah.
No, it's not over, but it's a trajectory. And out of the gate, We clearly and make no mistake, with those gains and those numbers, we're not satisfied. We still are hoping, and is our goal, to reach our 80, 90, 100 plan by 2025 to double those. Because we were in a situation, as you said, but I don't think until the 5 years you can say it's over. And certainly we're not satisfied with just being ahead. We want to do even more. And as I said, double, maybe triple those numbers.
Go ahead, Bill.
How is this playing out in terms of attracting teachers? Because you're all not only competing for student results and students, you're competing for teachers as well.
Well, I think part of the reason that we decided not to co-locate with the ASD schools was because it was harder to recruit the good teachers, because why would they come to a school where their future was uncertain? And certainly it has meant much more competition for good teachers, and I think it's attracted good teachers to Memphis.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.
Funding for Behind the Headlines is provided by DHG and Advisors. DHG is a full-service accounting firm serving Memphis and the Mid-South region for more than 60 years, combining community involvement with the technical resources of a national firm. For more information, visit dhgllp.com.